Carli Guzowski, welcome. Hello. Good to see you.
Hi, Sarah. It's good to see
Thanks
you.
for, yeah, you too. Thanks for coming back here. I say back because you and I met when Kara and I were facilitating that trauma sensitive mindfulness course, which is actually up on DODD's website. But we'll link to that later. But yeah, we got to meet through that offering, and just personally, we connected. You were really active in the group, and then we had some chats on the side that you said, hey, I'm shifting. I've been in the disability services world for what 18 or so years, and I'm pivoting into a new career path. And I thought, ooh, I want to share with folks. I want to hear more and share more. So you are a pleasure coach, a sex coach, a clinical sexologist in your new world here. But I have a hypothesis. Those thoughts or drives around pleasure and body connection, that's not new to you, but you're in a new role with that. So tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that lovely introduction for that. So yes, Carli Guzowski. I'm a certified sex coach. I just became certified this past May. Went through a year-long, actually just over a year-long intensive program where I learned about both clinical sexology, which is uh, what people do in the bedroom and how they think and feel about it, and really body based. What goes on with the body when we have sex, and what influences all those things, and how people feel about it. And then also part of that program was learning how to coach people who may have concerns around sex or sexuality,
Mm.
and coaching people through blocks they might be experiencing or struggles they might be having when it comes to their intimate lives. And so since then, I've been working on building my business, which is centered around pleasure, kind of this idea of pleasure as, you know, experiencing more pleasure all around. Not just necessarily in the bedroom. And also really big on consent. That's another specialty area that I focus a lot on, and how to build consent into, again, your everyday interactions. One of my favorite sayings is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so I love kind of that idea of not just focusing on who we are as sexual beings, but how that both influences who we are outside of that, but also how the outside parts of ourselves influence who we are as sexual beings. So that's really something that is pretty close to my heart, and supporting people, and then also bringing all those pieces together to feel whole. Because I think sometimes people tend to have maybe parts of themselves that they don't feel quite comfortable with. And so, and I think sexuality, being intimate, that can be such a deeply personal thing, and people might not feel comfortable talking about that, but it still feels like almost like this emptiness or this hole there, because they might be struggling with one thing or another, low desire, or struggling with challenges experiencing orgasm, things like that. And so that's where I come in as a coach, and I support people in working through those things. And my company, Unwinding Pleasure, our main thing is just making and helping people feel whole again.
Ah, you saw me. I'm already taking notes here, and I have a million questions. Now you've laid out a lot of points. I
Yeah.
want to unpack a couple of things. I want to get to your name in a little bit. Unwinding Pleasure. That really struck me, and I think that was how I first heard of you. You said, I've got this company, Unwinding Pleasure, and I just thought, gosh, that's so deep, especially when it comes to those of us who are in the giving field, the helping field, the service field. Our needs often are coming last. I don't champion that. I think we need to shift that culture, right? But pouring back into ourselves and putting ourselves, if not first, the same as far as being poured into, right? That's so important. But it can be scary. It can be scary to pour back to myself if I've neglected that part of myself for a long time. But part of your story, and we can link to the blog that you shared, part of your story was that you and your work, you hit that space of burnout. And that space of burnout, what I've been learning a lot lately is really burnout only happens when we're not pouring into ourselves. It doesn't happen if your self-care, your capacity to regulate and get your needs met, you have even more to give. So it's not about over giving, it's about a lack of pouring into self. So if you can share a little bit more about how, and this is where I want to tie back the phrase, how you do one thing is how you do everything. My partner's a coach, and I know that language from her, and I wrestle with that so hard. I'm like, no, it could be different. Da, da. So that was a lot, but I'd love for you to kind of slow us down. And what were you doing before, which was how you were doing everything, and what are you doing now that you're not in that burnout space? What started to shift?
So, as you mentioned before, I spent close to 20 years. I was thinking it was like 17 and a half or something like that, working within the disability field. The bulk of that, I was qualified intellectual disability professional, which is essentially a case manager.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I equate it to, and working within group homes with folks with physical and intellectual disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved the field. I loved doing what I did. But there was a point where I felt like I was hitting more walls than being able to go through them and pass.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think that that's a common thing when you're dealing with situations where there's a lot of regulations, and regulations have their place. They
Like
obviously
rules
serve
and regulations, not
rules.
regulation practices upheld by
Yeah,
your
yes,
right,
thank you.
right.
Yeah. Rules and regulations. Things imposed by the government. And they obviously have
Mm,
a place.
mhm,
But sometimes, and I think a lot of people have experienced this, sometimes they get in the way.
mm,
And it sometimes feels like there's just so much red tape
mm,
that we're trying to work through that actually hinders folks, especially the folks with disabilities, to be able to live
mhm,
the lives that they really want to. Um,
mhm,
and like I said, for me, this was my personal experience. I just got to a point where I felt like I could do more good outside as an ally of that field than what I could do within
mm,
the field.
mhm, mhm,
And I was finding myself just feeling completely defeated. Just like I said, just hitting those walls, wall after wall after wall. And it just got to be so much of a struggle. And of course, the pandemic happened, and that
mhm.
just collective trauma for
Yeah.
everyone, definitely had a huge impact on myself and how I viewed what I was doing in my own life,
Mhm,
and how much time I was spending not only on my family, um, but also taking care of myself, and
mm,
really focusing on who I was as a human, who I was, what were my contributions to the world. And
mm,
so it just really needed to kind of shift, like, where am I going with all of this? And if I'm devoting and putting all of this time and effort into something where I felt like it was a constant uphill battle,
mhm,
how can I take my knowledge, all of the things I learned about outcomes and goals, and going through and person-centered planning, and all of these things
mhm,
that I loved about the field and that I loved about supporting people with disabilities and seeing them reach and those outcomes that they wanted. I could take
mhm,
that and move it into something a little bit different.
mhm.
And it was an interesting path that I got to sex coaching, and not
Yeah,
just
yeah,
life coaching or clarity coaching or any other, wellness coaching and things like that.
yeah.
But concurrently, I personally had things going on in my own life, in my
Mhm,
relationship with my husband. After having kids,
mm,
things change, right?
mhm,
Like the
mhm,
relationship dynamics changed a lot. I also was going through a lot internally about, shame and guilt around who
mm,
I am as a sexual being. So
mhm.
just all this stuff was going on at once. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, like, I gotta shift somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I landed on sex coaching because of my own experience going through and sorting through all of that, that struggle and kind of those Emily Nagoski in her
Mm,
book As You Are talks about having a garden and pulling the weeds. And that
mm,
really I love that. And that
mhm,
just really for me was kind of the thing because I'm going through and I'm pulling the weeds, right? And I'm pulling out like saying, okay, what needs to stay in my garden?
mm,
And what do I need to take out?
mm,
And I just came to that conclusion that I needed to shift and get out of the corporate world.
mm,
I needed to do things for myself and I needed to build a life around a business
mm,
versus devoting my life to a business.
yeah. Well, it seems like it's been a positive path for you, right? I think that, well, there's a couple things that come to my mind. One, I'm in my work, we're always talking about how do we get to the root, right? Not just be distracted by the symptoms and make plans based on those, but really focus on the root. And that's what I hear a lot of people say about sex coaching.
Mm,
Yes, we can talk about our stories, right? The psychology, psychotherapy. Yes, we can talk about our emotional being, of course, right? That's where the work is. Yes, we can move in our body, but as you keep going down the layers, literally our root chakra, right? That space around our genitals, that sex, it is the root for so many things, not just about sex and sexuality. It
mm,
has to do a lot with how are we using our voice? How do we see ourselves in the world? How do we feel valued? Do we feel in confidence in our agency, right? So, and I know you talk about this. It's not sex coaching isn't just about the act of sex, right? But there's understanding pleasure and consent and so many things outside of that. My curiosity is let's talk to the human service professionals and families that are listening, right, who are more in our world. And how do you support folks to stay, not to stay in places that are toxic or unhealthy, or that they the shadow side of overgiving, so not to stay there. How do you support people to pour back into themselves in this realm so that they can keep showing up whole and full in their work, or to navigate what I hear you say kind of felt like brick walls sometimes? Like some of us aren't going to leave those roles, but what can we do internally to know how to find windows and other pathways?
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Sarah. I think, one of the big things that in sex coaching that we do is we focus on the fact that we spend a lot of time neck up. We spend
Mm,
a lot of time in our heads, right? We're always thinking, always, one step ahead of ourselves. And one of the things that we experience with sex is that it's a very, yes, the brain is the main organ,
mm-hmm.
but when people start to slow down and focus on their body, and this is, I mean, you find this in mindfulness, right? You find this
Yeah.
in yoga, you find this in a lot of different spaces that are around self-care and extreme self-care. um, and so one of the things that I do as a coach is support people to incorporate whatever works for them. I don't like to push any one mindset on somebody because mindfulness might not work, right?
Mm,
So it's really getting to know my client, really understanding who they are as a person, who they are, and what brings them joy, what works for them, and then really to start to focus on the sensations that they're having in their body.
mm,
I think when we get back to the body and we really pay attention to how does this touch feel, you know,
mm,
what feels really good and what doesn't feel really
mm,
good, and then
mhm.
we build on that in the ability to then communicate all of those things. And I think that that's where some of this stuff, it's again, it's kind of that cycle, that ball, that it's
Mm,
always going around, or a circle, I guess is a better example.
mm,
You know, if I do this in my everyday life, if I get more comfortable with asking what I want at the restaurant, then I get more comfortable with asking what I want in the you
yeah,
know
yeah.
if I get more comfortable with being a little bit more vocal at work, I can maybe get a little bit more comfortable with being more vocal at home. And so I think it's really too about not only just connecting with the body but finding your voice
Mm,
and finding
mm,
out who you are, and then incorporating all of that into to that pleasure, and
Mm.
and then there's the other piece about shame and guilt and stuff like that. And it's the ability to get more comfortable with, yes, I am normal, and
Mm.
yes, I am a sexual being, and that's
Mm.
okay,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. My needs matter. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And you talk about,
Mm.
us putting everything else, right? At,
Mhm.
at the
Mhm.
top of the list, and then we come at the bottom. And so that's
Mhm.
another way that I can support my clients. And I do support my clients, is
Mm.
helping them to say, hey, my needs do matter.
Yeah.
And in order for me to experience pleasure, whether it's on their own or with a partner, is to be
Mm.
able to really fully listen to what it is that they want and what their body wants.
Mm. I love this because and again I reviewed your blog before we talked because I wanted to kind of get some more details. But you say friends or people ask like, what is this and what isn't this? And so one of the things I'm really hearing, the term sex coach, it could people can they can have all kinds of thoughts around what that means, yeah, etc. Right? But what I'm really hearing is that you as a companion to some walking alongside someone in their journey. You help people know they have a body. You help them know that in that body there's so much power. And that if we can really tune in and connect here, that body is coming with us wherever we go. It's in the bedroom, it's in the kitchen, it's in the office, it's in the car as I'm driving to work, right? So that to me is really generous and less scary. Oh, I need or want a sex coach might feel like a thin lane, but I want to know who I am in the fullness of my being. That's really a generous offering that you're bringing to the world.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, I don't know if anything want to spark from that. If you wanted
Yeah, it's
but
it,
yeah,
I just get lots of "Ooh," yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And it's this idea of just I think you mentioned it earlier, Sarah, is this idea of slowing down
Yeah.
and really taking notice of, what's going on around you. What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you
Hmm.
taste? What do you see? What do you feel? Those are all things that can then be transferred into, you know, your intimate life, your sex life,
Yeah.
all of those
Hmm.
things. And one of the things I do want to mention, that you kind of touched on is, in my blog, I do indicate like, okay, this is what I do as a coach. This is what I don't do as a coach.
Hmm.
So one of the things I like to make clear to people is I'm not a therapist. I'm not a
Hmm.
licensed therapist.
Hmm.
But one of the things as a coach that I do is, I use a lot of referrals. So,
Mm.
there might be a situation where, it is appropriate that somebody does have some things that might need to be worked out with a therapist. And
Hmm.
that's where I would come in and say, hey, look, this is where I can support you.
Hmm.
But maybe let's think about some other support that you might need. Or for example, male clients, or those with, born as males and things like that. Might need some support from a urologist. That's the
Hmm.
support. I obviously, I'm
Sure.
not a medical doctor.
Sure. Sure.
So
Hmm.
I might indicate, obviously, like, someone who has a prostate, they might
Hmm.
need to seek support from a
Hmm.
doctor for that, because there might be more issues medically going on that might
Hmm.
be impacting an erection or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm. So you're
Um,
gonna stay in your lane. You're gonna, but
exactly,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Beautiful.
Another
Mhm.
thing that I think is important that people understand is I don't do any hands-on. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't, I do all virtual. It's
Mhm.
talk only. And so, there are avenues and places that go down that route.
Mhm.
That's not me.
Mhm. Mhm.
I only do
Mhm.
talk only. And
Mhm.
as you mentioned, before, you can view me as kind of like a support,
Mhm.
like an actual coach,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
on the sidelines. I'm not watching
Yeah,
anything. I
yeah.
don't
Not
see
not during,
anything,
yeah. Yeah.
nothing like that. But in the conversations that we have, when I coach someone, and the
Mm.
questions that I ask, use that to really tease out, like, getting to that root, like you said,
Mhm.
is getting to
Mhm.
that root of, okay, what is underlying these challenges and these experiences. And actually, yesterday did a post about low desire and what might be the underlying causes of those. Is it stress? Everybody's very stressed right now. Is it some underlying resentment that exists there? So really it's just kind of getting to that heart of, okay, why don't you feel like having sex right now?
Yeah.
Is it really that you just don't have libido, or is it that there is something else that's going on?
So your capacity for curiosity, you might start here with a question, but you'll narrow it down and boil it down. And again, you offer a holistic view,
Yes.
which that brings me to the 30 days of pleasure that you did, that you're on Instagram, right? And one, I wore my sweatshirt for this interview because I'm very pleasurable in my sweatshirt. Usually I kind of look a little bit more profesh, but I thought, you know what, we're going to be talking about pleasure today, so I'm chilling. Got my Whitney Houston t-shirt underneath. So that's one way that I experience pleasure, through clothing and through dress. But bridge us from sex coaching to pleasure as its own guiding light, and tell us more about the kind of the aspects of that, and how that impacts your work.
Yeah, thanks. So my company, Unwinding Pleasure, I know you mentioned that before. So there's this idea of, as we grew up, we were influenced by a lot of different things, right? Whether it be religious or the church or our parents or caregivers, whether it be school or the media. I mean, so many different things.
So many, sure.
And all of these things, one of the things I always say is there's sex is all around us, but we don't talk about it, right? And in that meaning that we don't talk about it in a way that's healthy or in a way that is accepting. So a lot of the messaging that we get is very negative. It's very shameful. And so the idea of this unwinding is that I call them pleasure centers. That's just kind of a name I throw out there. There's not really a pleasure center.
Okay.
But unless you want to consider, the brain and the dopamine and all this, all things, but
science.
Yes. But so this idea that our pleasure centers with each of those things, right? They just get wrapped up more and more. And more. So you kind of think of maybe like a ball of yarn, and it goes around and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so then there's this our pleasure is in there, right? It's hiding in that little ball. And so this idea of unwinding and unraveling all of that and peeling off those layers, pulling, that string down and down until we get back to that. So what I did is I came up with this 30 ways in 30 days pleasure challenge. And it was this idea of coming up with different ways every day to experience pleasure in your day-to-day life. Some of mine, I love nature, I love gardening. So being near water was such a pleasure for me. Doing things in my garden or food. Ice cream, I love ice cream, right? And so again, this idea, so there's a few things going on there. One is it takes about 30 days to break a habit.
Nice.
So 30 ways in 30 days, so getting and working in that pleasure every single day helps us not only to break the habit of denying ourselves pleasure, but also getting used to and getting comfortable with the idea of it's okay for me to have this experience. It's okay for me to seek out pleasurable experiences because guess what, science, makes our brain happy, right?
Yes.
And when our brains get that happy, that happy hit again, then we want to do it more and more and more. And then guess what? It makes it easier to bring that into our sex lives. And so there was a lot of things going on with that challenge, and I had so much fun doing it, and I do plan on doing it again.
Nice.
And just to kind of get a little bit more engagement with that, but people can do it on their own, too, if they want to, just working in, ways to experience pleasure and comfortable, with it. Yeah.
I love it because it felt accessible. It felt flexible. I always get a new bouquet every week. I have flowers here. As and I wouldn't have said it's for pleasure. I usually said it because it brings me joy or it brings me light. But I know we're in this age of the kind of the pleasure revolution, right? So it's so cool to have your take on it out there. I love the visual of unwinding. When I first heard it, I was felt like I'm here as a knot, right? And if I can just one moment at a time come back into my full self, not just how could that impact my sex life, but how could it impact my work, my friendships, even my digestion, right? When you think about that, like how we eat, am I shoving down and watching a show, or am I savoring, right? Am I enjoying food in that way? So yeah, there's so many different angles you could go. Carli, we're going to link to all your stuff, your Instagram and your blog and things like that. But I'm curious if you could leave us with a practice. Is there something, we're not going to have 30 days right this second, but it's just what can we do in a moment to come back into ourselves and to start to elicit that pleasure center? Would you be willing to share
Yeah,
something?
absolutely. So I think probably one of the greatest things that I think that people can do is, we've already talked about this quite a bit, is just taking the time to slow down, even if
Mm,
it's 5 minutes, no matter what you're doing. If you mentioned eating, if you're eating
mm,
something, drinking a cup of tea, sitting
mm,
outside, driving to work, whatever it is in your day-to-day routine, just sitting, taking that time to just notice how different things feel,
mm,
in your body, what the different sounds, how they, like those experiences of what it is to really listen to your favorite song, what it is about that song that you really,
mm,
really enjoy. But yeah, just taking that time to really slow down and just notice what's going
mm,
on around you. Because again, it the more you do that, the more your body learns how to regulate and how to
mm.
experience everything that's going on, and getting out of your head and bringing it down into the
Wow.
body and all those
Yeah.
sensations. But yeah, I think that's a really quick, easy way that people can just take, like I said, it can take 5 minutes, and no matter where you are, you can do it. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, uh, so put on your favorite song and go dance, for 5 minutes.
Yes.
It just getting your body used to this idea of it's okay to feel good.
Oh, that's the perfect place to pause here. It's okay to feel good. That I would even offer that as an affirmation, right? Set your timers 5 minutes a day to give your body the remembering that you matter, you deserve that, and it's okay. It's okay to feel good. So,
Absolutely.
oh, thank
Yeah.
you, Carli. I hope folks find you. I hope folks connect with you, and yeah, you're a gift to this world, and I'm grateful you were able to spend this time together.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you giving me this time and this space
Yeah.
to share.
So, awesome. All right, take care.
Yeah, you too.